May 1903, Leavenworth, Kansas. A man sits down in the intake chair at the United States Penitentiary, and the records clerk looks up from his desk and stops. He has seen this face before. He is absolutely certain of it. The prisoner says his name is Will West, says he has never been here. First offense, first arrest, never set foot in this place. The clerk walks to the filing cabinet, pulls a card, and sets it on the table between them. The card has a photograph. The photograph shows Will West's face. The name written on the card is William West, and the measurements, skull width, forearm length, foot size, match the man sitting in the chair almost perfectly. Will West looks at the photograph and says he doesn't know where they got it. The clerk sends an officer to the cell block. William West is in his cell. He has not moved. He has not escaped. Two men, same face, same name, nearly identical measurements, no known blood relation, and the most trusted identification system in the world has just looked at two different human beings and seen one person. Paris, 1879. A 26-year-old records clerk at the Prefecture of Police stares at a stack of criminal intake forms and decides they are useless. His name is Alphonse Bertillon. His father is a statistician. His grandfather coined the word demography, and he grew up in a household where human beings were reduced to numbers, and he believed deeply that numbers didn't lie. The problem he is staring at is ancient. Cities are exploding with people. Paris, London, New York, Chicago. Millions of strangers packed together, and police departments with no reliable way to track who they've seen before. A criminal arrested under one name walks out, changes it, gets arrested again, and the court has no way to prove it. Judges cannot impose harsher sentences on repeat offenders because they cannot prove someone is a repeat offender. The law is functionally blind to its own history. The existing physical descriptions are worse than useless. Medium height, brown hair, average build. That described half the men in France, and everyone knew it. Bertillon's idea rests on one biological fact. The human skeleton, once fully grown, does not change. Bones don't lie. And the probability of two people sharing the exact same combination of 11 bone measurements is, mathematically, almost zero. He measures everything: head length, head width, the length of the middle finger, the length of the left foot, the length of the forearm from elbow to fingertip, standing height, sitting height, arm span. He adds photographs taken under standardized lighting, full face and profile. He invents the mugshot. He calls the system anthropometry. The press calls it Bertillonage after him. 1882, the Paris police officially adopt it. 1884, it identifies 241 repeat offenders in France in a single year. Within a decade, it has crossed Europe, reached New York, spread to Argentina and Chicago and Canada. Law enforcement has never had anything like this before, and governments celebrate it as a revolution in public safety. For the first time in history, a criminal's body is their permanent record. It doesn't matter what name they give because the bones remember. But the bones are not the only thing the body remembers. 9th century China. Merchants pressing inked fingertips onto business contracts, not as decoration, but as identity, a signature that could not be forged or disowned. The understanding that the ridges on a fingertip were unique to each person was not a modern discovery. It was ancient intuition, applied practically long before any scientist gave it a name. 1858, Bengal, India. A British civil servant named William Herschel is managing colonial administration in the Hooghly district, and he is tired of local workers collecting government wages and then denying they did. Signatures are too easy to disown, so he begins requiring workers to press their full handprint onto contracts. Over years of collecting these prints, he notices that no two are the same. Stacks of handprints spanning decades, and the patterns never repeat. He doesn't publish a scientific paper. He just keeps the prints and keeps noticing. 1859, Tokyo. A Scottish physician named Henry Faulds is working as a missionary doctor and finds prehistoric pottery at an archaeological site, ancient clay bearing fingerprint impressions thousands of years old. He begins studying ridge patterns systematically, and he publishes an article in the scientific journal Nature, the first person to propose in print that fingerprints could be used to identify criminals, that a bloody print left at a crime scene could be matched to a specific person. He writes to Charles Darwin with the idea, and Darwin, old and ill, forwards the letter to his cousin, Francis Galton. William Herschel reads Fall's article and immediately writes in to claim the idea was his first. The two men spend the next several decades in bitter public dispute over credit. Neither of them gets it. Not fully. Francis Galton collects more than 8,000 sets of fingerprints and studies them for years. He calculates the probability of two people sharing the same fingerprint pattern and arrives at a number: 1 in 64 billion. At the time, the entire population of Earth is roughly 1.5 billion people. You could print every human being who had ever lived and never find a duplicate. He publishes his book, Fingerprints, in 1892, classifies ridge patterns into 3 basic types: arches, loops, and whorls, and shows how to catalog and search them at scale. The science exists, the mathematics exist. What doesn't exist yet is a working system with enough institutional will behind it to replace what already works well enough. Argentina, 1891. A Croatian-born police official named Juan Vucetich is working at the La Plata Police Office of Identification, running Bertillon measurements and fingerprints side by side, testing both systems simultaneously. After reading a French journal article about Galton's research, he abandons the measurements entirely and builds his own fingerprint classification system, more than 100 types, detailed enough to search a large database. He calls it dactyloscopy. 1892. 2 young boys are found murdered outside Buenos Aires, throats cut. Their mother, Francisca Rojas, tells police that a man named Velasquez killed them. Velasquez is brought in and subjected to interrogation, the standard methods of the era, but he won't confess because he didn't do it. A police inspector examines the crime scene carefully and finds, on a wooden doorpost, a bloody fingerprint. He cuts out the section of wood and sends it to Vucetich. Vucetich compares it against his files. It matches Francisca Rojas. Confronted with her own fingerprint, she confesses. It is the first documented case in history where a fingerprint identifies a murderer and produces a criminal conviction. Argentina's police abandon Bertillonage and switch to Vucetich's system. Europe watches, considers, moves slowly. Edward Henry, Commissioner of Police in Bengal, develops his own fingerprint classification system, simpler, more practical for large-scale police work. 1901, Scotland Yard officially adopts it, and Britain becomes the first major European power to replace Bertillon measurements with fingerprints as the primary method of criminal identification. Paris watches, doesn't follow. Alphonse Bertillon adds fingerprints to his cards as a supplementary feature, but he will not surrender the measurements. He defends the system he built for the rest of his career. And then comes Alfred Dreyfus. 1894. A French army officer is convicted of passing military secrets to Germany, and the conviction rests partly on Bertillon's personal analysis of handwriting evidence, not the measurement system, but his own interpretation of documents supported by elaborate pseudo-scientific theories he constructs to place the guilt on Dreyfus. The documents were not written by Dreyfus. He is innocent, and he spends 5 years in solitary confinement on Devil's Island before the truth surfaces, the real spy is identified, and Dreyfus is exonerated. The name Alphonse Bertillon, which had once represented the gold standard of scientific identification, becomes permanently attached to the worst wrongful conviction in French history. His system outlives him by only a few years. Back to Leavenworth. The records clerk staring at 2 identical men is M.W. McClory, son of Major Robert McClory, the warden who had introduced Bertillonage to the United States in 1887 with tremendous pride, who had trained officers in it and built institutions around it. 2 years after the Will and William West incident, M.W. McClory attends the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 and meets Sergeant John K. Ferrier of Scotland Yard, a trained fingerprint specialist who has come to America specifically to demonstrate the new system. Ferrier visits Leavenworth, trains the staff, makes the case in person. In November 1904, a fingerprint system is officially established at the prison. Major Robert McClory, the man who brought Bertillonage to America, signs off on replacing it. October 1905, M.W. McClory and Ferrier fingerprint every inmate at Leavenworth, including Will West and William West. Their prints are completely different. The Bertillon cards are filed away. Here is what the story usually leaves out. The Will and William West case did not cause the shift to fingerprinting. The timeline makes that clear. The two men were processed in 1901 and 1903, and the decision to switch came from a World's Fair meeting in 1904, driven by pressure from Britain, from Vucetich's success in South America, from Ferrier's visit, not from the West incident. The story wasn't published until 1918 in a book on personal identification, more than 15 years after the events. M.W. McClowry, the clerk who processed both men, published 2 articles about identification history and never mentioned the West case in either of them. If that moment had truly been the pivot point that history later claimed it was, the man standing at the center of it would have written about it. What happened is this. The West case became a story, a perfect story. 2 men, 1 face, 1 system that couldn't tell them apart, 10 fingers that could. History needed that scene to explain a large and complicated institutional change, and the West case provided it. The facts are real. The men were real. The measurement coincidence was real. The fingerprint comparison was real. What is constructed is the causation. The change was already coming. The story arrived in time to explain it, and explanation became origin. 1908. The newly formed Bureau of Investigation begins building a fingerprint database. 1924, the U.S. Congress creates the FBI's Identification Division by merging the Leavenworth database with the records of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. 810,000 fingerprint cards on the first day. J. Edgar Hoover understands immediately that the database is power. He demands prints from federal employees, military recruits, immigrants, every arrested person in any cooperating jurisdiction, and he runs public campaigns asking ordinary Americans to submit their prints voluntarily, framing it as civic duty, as patriotism. Millions comply. The fingerprint has become, in the span of a few decades, not just a tool for tracking criminals, but the mechanism by which a modern state knows its own people. 1963, Dallas, Texas. A latent partial palm print is found on a Mannlicher Carcano rifle recovered from the 6th floor of the Texas Spookbach Depository. It belongs to Lee Harvey Oswald. 1968, a latent fingerprint on a rifle leads to the arrest of James Earl Ray for the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. 2 of the most significant criminal investigations in American history, both broken open by the ridges on human skin. The science holds. Galton's calculation, 1 in 64 billion, has never been disproven. The dermal ridges on human fingertips form between the 10th and 17th week of gestation, shaped by a combination of genetic instruction and the unique physical pressures of individual fetal development. Even identical twins, who carry the same DNA, develop different fingerprints. The genes set the general pattern, and the physical environment writes the specific details. Nature does not repeat itself at that resolution. But nature is not the problem.
2004, Portland, Oregon. Federal agents knock on the door of Brandon Mayfield, a Portland attorney and Muslim convert. He is arrested as a material witness in the Madrid train bombings, the attack that killed 191 people and wounded nearly 2,000 more. The FBI has matched his fingerprint to a bag of detonators near the bomb site. 3 FBI fingerprint examiners review the match and confirm it. An independent court-appointed expert confirms it a 4th time. Brandon Mayfield spends 2 weeks in jail. Then Spanish authorities identify the actual owner of the fingerprint, an Algerian national named Unan Daoud, whose prints match the crime scene evidence far more precisely when examined without a pre-existing suspect in mind. Mayfield is released. The FBI issues a formal apology. The internal review finds a single cause. The examiners knew he was under suspicion, and that knowledge shaped what they saw in the ridges. The print didn't lie. The humans reading it did. After Mayfield, researchers begin studying fingerprint evidence more systematically, and they find something uncomfortable. The same examiner, shown the same print twice in different case contexts, sometimes reaches different conclusions. The subjectivity that Bertillon had tried to eliminate with numbers had crept back in through the people doing the reading. American courts had been permitting expert witnesses to testify that a fingerprint match was a certainty, not a probability, for nearly a century, and that testimony had sent people to prison for life. Forensic standards begin shifting. The language changes. Instead of certainty, examiners in rigorous jurisdictions now express conclusions as probability. The print is consistent with the defendants. The likelihood of a coincidental match is disclosed. A small linguistic shift with enormous practical consequences, because it asks juries to think in probabilities rather than accept absolutes, and that is a harder thing to do in a room where someone's life is at stake.
1999, the FBI launches IAFIS, the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, roughly 47 million records, a criminal search returning results within 2 hours. The distance between a clerk pulling a paper card from a Kansas filing cabinet in 1903 and a computer returning a match in under 2 hours is not just a distance in time, it is a different universe of capability built on the same biological fact.
September 11, 2001. The United States begins the most aggressive expansion of biometric identification in its history. 2004, the U.S. Visit Program begins collecting fingerprints from all foreign nationals entering the country at every port of entry. Not criminals, not suspects, everyone. And a fingerprint becomes a legal condition of crossing the border. Smartphones add fingerprint sensors. 1 billion people begin unlocking their most private information with their thumbprints every morning without a second thought. The tool that began as a way to track repeat offenders in 19th century prisons now authenticates financial transactions, crosses international borders, opens secure government facilities, and protects personal devices containing the most intimate details of private life. The same ridge pattern that M.W. McClary pressed onto a paper card in Kansas in 1905, a glass screen in 2025. Will West serves his sentence and disappears from the public record entirely. No further arrests, no further documentation. A man who became the central symbol of an entire transformation in forensic science and then went home to whatever was left of his life. William West remains in prison, serving his life sentence for murder. In 1916, he escapes. The fingerprint system that his case helped symbolize identifies him after the escape, and he is recaptured. A man who could fool every measurement of 19th century science could not fool his own skin. Both men were black. The Bertillon system was not deployed equally in the United States. It was applied overwhelmingly against black Americans, immigrants, and the poor, the population's law enforcement targeted most aggressively. The database was a database of the surveilled, and the surveilled were not random. Fingerprinting did not fix that. The FBI's database, containing the prints of tens of millions of people who have never been convicted of any crime, still reflects the demographics of who gets arrested in America, which still reflects everything that was broken about American policing in 1903. A new technology running on an old injustice is still an old injustice. The dermal ridges on human fingertips are hundreds of millions of years old as a biological feature, evolved in primates possibly to improve grip, possibly to enhance tactile sensitivity, possibly to channel water away from a grasping surface. The exact evolutionary purpose is still debated. Whatever they evolved to do, they became the most reliable signature a human body produces. They form before you were born, and they do not change. Criminals have tried to destroy them, pressing fingertips against heated surfaces, using acid to dissolve the skin. The skin heals. The same pattern grows back, because the pattern is not encoded in the surface layer. It lives in the deeper dermis, below what any surface wound can reach. The body keeps its record, whether you want it to or not. Every system built to answer the question of identity has eventually broken down. The eyewitness who was certain, the Bertillon card that matched 2 men, the fingerprint examiner who saw what he expected to see. Every tool revealed the limits of what came before it and quietly contained the limits that the next tool would eventually expose. Bertillon's system was the most scientific identification method the world had ever seen, until it wasn't. Fingerprinting was the most reliable method the world had ever seen, until a biased examiner in Portland proved it wasn't. The pattern doesn't change, the certainty does. May 1903, Leavenworth, Kansas. 2 men in the same prison, same face, same name, same measurements, one convicted of murder, one of manslaughter, neither knowing the other exists. A records clerk brings them into the same room, and staff cannot tell them apart if they are wearing hats. Someone takes their fingerprints. The patterns are completely, unmistakably different. 2 men that every instrument of 19th century science said were one person, and 10 fingers that said otherwise. The Bertillon cards go into a drawer, kept as historical record. The measurement system that cataloged half the criminal population of the Western world is quietly retired. The fingerprint era begins. Right now, in the time it took you to listen to this, hundreds of fingerprint searches have run through federal databases. Phones have been unlocked, borders have been crossed, evidence has been logged, suspects have been identified. The system that started with a Parisian clerk measuring skulls in 1879, survived a catastrophic failure with Dreyfus in 1894, broke down in a Kansas prison in 1903, crossed the Atlantic at a World's Fair in 1904, and grew into a global infrastructure of billions of stored prints. That system is running right now.
More powerful than Bertillon imagined, more fallible than its early champions admitted, more embedded in daily life than anyone who designed it intended. And it began because nature, with no regard for statistics, printed 2 copies of the same human face, gave them nearly the same name, and sent them to the same prison. The universe found the flaw. It just took the rest of us long enough to look at it clearly.